What is evolutionary creation? Isn't that somewhat of a contradiction in terms? How does it differ from the young Earth creation, old Earth creation, and intelligent design perspectives? Also, what does evolutionary creation believe about evolution and about the Bible? Is it a legitimate theological perspective? Well, these are great questions, and that's why we're going to talk about it today on the Science and Faith podcast. The term evolutionary creation was first popularized by Dennis Lamoureux in his 2008 book, Evolutionary Creation. And really what the term evolutionary creation is a replacement for the term theistic evolution. And so it's more than just simply a rebranding, but it's also an expansion on what Christians can believe about evolution and how that relates to the Bible and to certain theological doctrines within the Christian faith. The reason why there was a name switch from theistic evolution to evolutionary creation is because the term itself, theistic evolution, is a little bit odd. It's the only, since evolution is a field and a branch of science, it's a little odd to have a theistic branch of science. So, for example, we don't have theistic chemistry or theistic physics or theistic biology. So to have theistic evolution, it just sounds a little bit odd. And so the term evolutionary creation is used to talk about how our view of creation is influenced by evolutionary biology. And so that's the main reason for the new name. But there are some important distinctives within the evolutionary creation view. It's a very broad perspective. It has a lot to say about not only evolution, but the physical world. It has a lot to say about the Bible and theology and Genesis and all of the things that we've covered in previous videos talking about the other perspectives. So I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them. We can't really do an in-depth discussion on evolutionary creation, but I would recommend, if you are interested in learning more, that you would check out Dennis Lamoureux's book, Evolutionary Creation. It really does a good job of laying out what the perspective is and addressing many, many questions that people have in terms of the compatibility between the Christian faith and evolutionary science. And that's one of the main important distinctives of evolutionary creation, and that's the first major distinctive that we're going to talk about, is that evolutionary creation fully, completely accepts the evolutionary science as it is. And this is important because evolution is a theory. It's a scientific theory. But what that means is it doesn't mean that evolution is just a theory. It means that evolution is a theory. It's well established, well accepted within, and well reviewed within the scientific community. It has mountains of evidence to support it. Much like the theory of gravity or the theory of relativity. This isn't just some idea that we throw around as if it could be true, but we're not sure. No, it's a theory. That means that this has been tested. It has been peer-reviewed. The evidence has been looked at and analyzed over and over and over again. And the conclusion that scientists come to time after time after time is that evolution is real. It's a fact. Much like, I say, the theory of gravity or the theory of relativity. This isn't something that is really open for debate anymore. It's an official, well-established scientific theory. And so that's one of the main distinctives, the primary distinctive, the first distinctive of evolutionary creation is it fully embraces and fully accepts the evolutionary science. Because evolution, by natural selection, is a well-established scientific theory. So that's very important to begin with. The second distinctive is that because we fully accept the evolutionary science, we distinguish, rather than conflate, evolutionary science from philosophical naturalism. We recognize that there's a distinction between saying that organisms evolve over time and saying that therefore God does not exist. There's a difference between those two things. There's the science that says organisms evolve over time and they give rise to other organisms, new organisms, and concluding philosophically, therefore God doesn't exist. Well, that's a philosophical statement, a theological statement, but it's not a scientific statement. Saying I can scientifically prove that God does not exist is a statement that makes no sense because science can't prove or disprove the existence of God. It can demonstrate whether or not organisms evolve, but it says nothing about whether or not God has an active role in that. Science can't answer that question. And so we distinguish between the science of evolution and evolutionism, or scientific materialism, or what New Atheism argues is for philosophical naturalism, methodological naturalism. There's lots of different names for it. Scientism, scientific methodologicalism, scientific naturalism, all different kinds of names for it. But essentially what all those terms mean is that you can use science to make philosophical claims, which of course is preposterous. You can't do that. So, nor can you use theology or philosophy to make scientific claims. So everyone has to kind of stay in their own lane. All right, everyone has to stay within their field. And for the science, when we just look at the science, and we look and examine the natural world and how it functions, how it works, the mechanisms within nature, what we see is that evolution makes the best sense of the scientific data of how the world works from a scientific and a physical perspective. Evolution is the best mechanism we have to understand how organisms evolved and how they are evolving into the future, and how they develop, how they grow, and how organisms change over time. Evolution by natural selection is the best mechanism we have for understanding that. What we conclude philosophically or theologically after that belongs to the philosophers and the theologians. But we fully accept the evolutionary science as the science states it, not as the New Atheists state it, not as other theologians state it, but as the science states. We fully accept that. So that's a second major distinctive. The third distinctive with evolutionary creation is that we see complete harmony between science and religion. We refuse the conflict narrative that says that science and religion are at war with each other or are promoting competing truths with each other. That's just complete garbage. That's not true. We completely, evolutionary creationists, myself being one of them, completely reject that. We see science and religion as being, specifically science and the Christian religion, as being completely in harmony. And one of the major reasons for that is because the God of the natural world is the God of the entire universe, the entire physical universe, but he's also the God of spiritual truth. He's the God of Christianity. He's the God of the, if we can say it, the God of the spiritual world. And I know there's some theologians who would get really angry if they hear me using that kind of language, can we get rid of the false dichotomy between the physical and the spiritual world? I don't want to dichotomize. I'm just using it as a helpful distinction because most people recognize in their minds a distinction between the physical and the spiritual world. So please, don't be angry at me. I'm just using those terms, okay? But because God is the God of the physical world and the God of the spiritual world, God would not create a physical world that would contradict the spiritual world. So he wouldn't create the world to function in a certain way and then in the Bible say something that contradicts what he did in nature. It doesn't make any sense. So if we know that organisms evolve and that humans have descended from a common ancestor that we share with apes and gorillas and chimpanzees, if we know that's to be true, then we also know that what we read in the Bible is going to be true as well, and there's not going to be competing truths. And at this point, I know everyone's jumping at their computer or on their phone, and they're saying, "But what about Adam and Eve? And there's a contradiction there." Well, we'll get to that hopefully in a future episode. We're going to talk about that, how evolution is compatible with Genesis 1 and the story of creation and the creation of Adam and Eve. We'll talk about that. But in this video, I just want to give an overview of what evolutionary creationism teaches, what it is, how we come to all those other conclusions we can get to in future episodes. But today, we're just talking about what evolutionary creationism is. So evolutionary creationism sees a complete harmony between science and religion, specifically science and the Christian religion. And so we have explanations for how we can hold to billions of years of evolution in common ancestry between humans and chimpanzees, and also hold to compatible views of things like the human beings being created in the image of God. Those two are not incompatible. They are completely compatible. How we get there is the subject for a future episode, and we'll hopefully do that. But for now, we just say the what, which is that they are compatible. So that's very important. Because science and the Christian religion both have God as their founder and their author, the natural world and the spiritual world, they cannot be in contradiction. It's not possible. God would not create. It's not in his nature to create two different things that are in contradiction. Because he's the author of both, then they are in harmony with each other. And then I would say another important distinctive for evolutionary creation is that we are not deists. We believe in divine guidance in nature. We would not say that God, 11 billion years ago, sparked the Big Bang, set the whole universe in motion, established evolution as the means for molecules to develop into organisms and organisms to eventually lead to human beings and intelligence and consciousness. But that was 11 billion years ago, and that was the last time God was involved in nature. We wouldn't say that. We would say that God is still, he was from the beginning, he was all along, and he is still today, and he will be in the future, intimately involved and connected and influencing and interacting and guiding the natural world. God is not, we are not deists. God is not somewhere way distant, far away, sitting on his sofa, drinking tea, completely ignoring and indifferent to the world that he has created. He is actively and intimately involved in the world that he has created, guiding it. He is guiding the evolutionary process. Now, I know there's some, you would say, well, when we look at the evolutionary process, there's no evidence that there's a designer. Well, we're not going to argue for design. We certainly can't argue it from a sort of scientific standpoint. But if we look at just the mechanism and we say evolution is a mechanism that unfolds, when we can talk about it from a theological perspective, and we can talk about the role of God in evolution. And from a scientific standpoint, we might say, well, evolution doesn't appear scientifically to have any kind of goal. It's not moving, it's not progressive, it's not moving toward improvement, it's not moving toward anything. But what we can say from a theological perspective is that it is that there is a progressive element, there is a goal, there is what theologians would call a teleology. There is a point a trajectory to evolution, that it is accomplishing something, it is moving towards something, it has that feel to it. So evolutionary creationists would say that God is not a deistic God disconnected completely from creation. He is intimately involved and connected to creation. He is influencing, he is guiding, he is interacting with the natural world. And so that's just kind of a brief overview of what evolutionary creation is. What I want to do in future episodes is I want to begin to flesh out some of those of how do we understand, how do we compatibilize common descent, human ancestry with millions and millions of years, and things like death before the fall, or suffering, and human ancestry with being created in the image of God and understanding Genesis. So and I think this is an important distinctive. This is the last distinctive, is that evolutionary creation is open to a wide variety of perspectives. There isn't just one teaching. We don't say, you have to believe that Adam and Eve are literal historical people. There's room for that within the evolutionary creation perspective. There are evolutionary creationists who believe that Adam and Eve were literal historical people. There are evolutionary creationists who don't. And that's the beauty of the evolutionary creation perspective, is that it's open to a wide perspective. It's open to a wide view. There are people who believe things and people who don't. But that's what makes evolutionary creation, I think, one of the most appealing perspectives, is it allows for possibilities rather than narrowly nailing down specifically what a person has to believe and then not changing from that. The beauty of evolutionary creation is we're always modifying and reforming and improving our position based on the latest research and based on the latest thought, theological and scientific information that is made available to us. So it's an exciting perspective to be a part of, because you always can make a contribution. There's always something new to learn. There's always a new perspective to come at a question from. And so for me, the evolutionary creation perspective is exciting because we're allowed to accept the science, but we're also allowed to explore the theological implications of that and to push the boundaries of our theological understanding of evolution. And so for me, I love the evolutionary creationist perspective for that, but that's what the evolutionary creation perspective is all about. It's about understanding that science is in harmony with the Christian religion. Inherently, they're not in conflict. They are compatible with each other. They are that sense of harmony that comes from science and religion fosters curiosity and scholarship that is really awesome. And also it's about divine guidance. God is not deistic. We're not deists. We don't believe God is completely disconnected. God is actively involved in his creation. And also, evolution's telling a story, and we get to read that story, and we get to we're a part of that story. We're still in that story as it's going and as it's unfolding. So that's just a quick overview of what evolutionary creation is. If you have any comments or questions about that, feel free to leave them down below. If there's other aspects of evolutionary creationism that you are interested in, curious about, or want to talk about, feel free to email me. My email address is scienceandfaithdortmund@gmail.com. We have some articles online on our website that also discuss evolutionary creationism in various perspectives, talking about different questions, the problem of suffering and evil and things like that, talking about image of God. You can check out our website. The web address there is scienceandfaith.de. That's all the time we've got for today. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time here on the Science and Faith Podcast.